This is section 7-1, Finding a Place to Live. The objectives of this section are to calculate the affordability of a monthly rent, to determine the relationship between square footage and monthly rent, to determine lease signing costs, and to calculate moving expenses. These are some of the key terms used in this section. Almost all of them are fairly self-explanatory. As a result, I'm not going to go into the individual definitions of each, but these are all terms that you should be familiar with and are discussed in this section. So, where will you live? In a few years from now, you'll have completed your education and you'll begin a career, and you'll have to find a place to live. So, where are you going to live? Are you going to get an apartment? Are you going to purchase a house? Are housing expenses so high that you're going to be forced to take and continue to live with your parents? Well, let's take a look and to see what's involved in finding a place to live. So let's look at example 1. Alex makes $61,992 per year and pays about 25% of his gross monthly income in federal and state taxes. He wants to find an apartment to rent. Estimate how much he can afford to pay for rent each month. Then determine how much money he will have after taxes and rent are paid. So the first thing we're going to have to do is find out what his gross monthly income is. Now, remember, when we're talking gross income, this is income prior to any deductions, any taxes, anything like that taken out. Now, we know his yearly gross income is $61,992, but we want to find out what that amounts to each month. So we're going to divide by 12 and come out with $5,166 as his gross monthly income. Now, the rule of thumb for affordable rent is to take 25 to 30% of your gross monthly income and set that aside for rent. Well, in this case, we're going to go halfway between, and we're going to say, well, what is 28% of his gross monthly income? So if we multiply 5,166 times 0.28, we come out with $1,446.48 as his affordable rent. This is how much he can afford to spend on rent. Now, we're going to try to figure out how much he spends on taxes each month. Now, he said that he spends about 25% of his gross monthly income on federal and state taxes. So if we multiply, the gross monthly income times 0.25, we come out with $1,291.50 of his gross income gets paid each month for taxes. So if we add the amount he spends on rent and the amount for taxes each month and subtract them from his gross monthly income, we come out with $2,428, which is the amount of money he has left each month for things like food, entertainment, transportation, things like that. All right, now let's look at example 2. Rufus and Maria have both been offered new jobs in a different city. A real estate broker sent them a listing of apartments in their desired location, showing the square footage in each apartment. Use linear regression analysis to determine if there is a correlation between the square footage of rental property and the amount charged for the monthly rent. What is the linear regression equation? And lastly, interpret the correlation coefficient. So here we're given a table. One column indicates the square footage of each apartment, in other words, how big the apartment is, and the other column indicates the particular rent for that sized apartment. Now, using that table, I used Desmos and took the data from that table and created a scatter plot, and you can see that here with all the dots. Then, also using Desmos, I requested what would be a good correlation, linear regression of those dots. And I came up with this equation here of y is equal to 0.91x plus 403.09. And also I came up with a correlation coefficient of R is equal to 0.96. Well, the fact that R is almost equal to 1 indicates that there is a very strong correlation here, and that this linear regression is a very good estimate as to the ratio of the square footage to the apartment monthly rent. All right, now let's look at example 3. And we're going to still be talking about Rufus and Maria. They paid a $200 application deposit for the 1,150 square foot apartment in example 2. They are required to pay a credit report, provide a credit report that costs $25 and to pay a security deposit equal to 1 month's rent. The landlord also requires the last month's rent at the time of signing the lease. The broker charged 10% of the yearly rent. How much should they expect to pay to be able to move into the apartment? Well, let's itemize each of these items. Their application deposit was $200. Their credit report fee was $25. The security deposit, which was equivalent to 1 month's rent, was $15.95. Their last month's rent was also $15.95. Their broker's fee, which was 10% of their monthly, of the amount that they pay for a year, so it's 0.1 times the monthly rate times 12, so they figure out the total that they have to pay for rent for a year and take 10% of that, and that came out to be $19.14. And lastly, the first month's rent was $15.95, so their total that they owe when they move into the apartment is $6,924. All right, example 4. Jay is moving from an apartment in Miami to one in Orlando. If Jay moves on a weekday, he will need more movers' time to pack, load, unload, and unpack, because his friends will not be able to help him. If he moves on a weekend, he can get his friends to help, cutting down on the number of hours he will need to hire movers. Move Out is a moving company that supplies movers, trucks, and moving equipment. They have given him the following moving estimates. So there's for a weekday move, and there's for a weekend move. Notice the time on the weekend is less because he's going to have friends to help him, where he'll have to use the movers for more hours on a weekday because his friends won't be around to help. So we need to determine the move-out hourly rates. Now, using the two rates here for weekday and weekend, we come out with 2 equations here. And if we plot them again using decimals, we come out with an intersection where x is equal to 70 and y is equal to 60. Well, what does that mean? That means basically that the moving company is charging $70 per hour for loading and unloading and $60 per hour for packing and unpacking. Now, example 5. Samantha is moving from Madison to La Crosse in Wisconsin. She will do all of the packing and unpacking by herself with her brother. The moving company quoted a price of $12.50 for 8 hours and driving 130 miles. They also quoted the same price if the truck drives an additional 30 miles to pick up Samantha's brother. Samantha figures that with her brother's help, she only needs to hire the movers for 6 hours. How much does the company charge per hour, and how much do they charge per mile for driving? Okay, you can see here in this table, for without her brother and with her brother, we're comparing the same cost, but the hours, notice, are different and the mileage is different. So the labor cost plus the truck rental is equal to the total cost, which in this case is $1,250. So we come up with our 2 equations, depending on whether she's using her brother or not using her brother. And now we can see that the price is $75 and $5, with the $75 being per hour for loading and unloading, and the $5 being per mile for the truck rental.